The brakes screamed once, a long metal complaint that ran the length of the chassis. And then we stopped. And that was the first thing that was wrong. 40,000 seats wrapped around us in the dark, tier upon tier of them climbing up into a sky the color of wet slate. And not one light burned where a light should have. I have driven this team to 90 stadiums in 11 countries. And a World Cup venue at 8 in the evening does not go dark. It glows. It hums. The floodlights bleed orange across the parking aprons. The security booths flicker blue. The vendor stalls smear neon onto wet asphalt. And somewhere, a generator is always running. Always, that low industrial heartbeat you stop hearing after a while, because it is simply the sound a living building makes. This one sat in front of us like a dead animal. A great ribbed shell of concrete and steel with its mouth open. And the only light anywhere was the sweep of our own headlamps crawling across a rolled steel gate that had already been shut against us. I am the driver. My name is Esteban Varga, 51 years old. And I've spent the better part of 30 years behind the wheel of buses exactly like this one. I know engines the way some men know their own hands. I know roads, the good ones, and the ones that lie to you. And I know the particular silence a place makes when everyone has just left it in a hurry, because that silence has a shape to it. An afterimage of motion, doors left swinging, and cups left half full. The gate in front of us was not the kind of gate they close for the night. I had watched 100 night gates close behind 100 buses. They close slow, with a man beside them and a hand raised in a wave. This one had come down fast and stayed down, and there was no man beside it. And it was not the kind of gate you close to keep the world out. It was the kind you close to keep something in. I cut the headlights to save the battery without thinking about why my hands did it. They moved on their own, the way hands do when some older animal part of you has already understood the situation that your mind is still refusing. The court went black, and into that black, behind me, 23 young men who were supposed to play a quarterfinal in 3 days went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when the adults stop talking and the children realize they should listen. Before I take you any further into that night, let me say something plainly. Thank you to everyone who keeps coming back to these stories. And if this is your first time riding along, welcome aboard. If grounded survival stories like this one are your kind of thing, subscribe, leave a comment, and stay with me, because it genuinely helps this channel keep going. Now let me tell you what was waiting for us behind that gate. There was a man on the other side of the fence, and he was running the wrong way. I want you to understand what that looks like, because it is the detail that has never left me. A guard, full uniform, reflective vest, catching the last of our dimming headlamps before they died. The radio still clipped to his shoulder, its little amber light still blinking. He came out of a tunnel mouth at a dead sprint, arms pumping, and he was not running toward an exit. There were 3 exits he could have made 4. I saw them all in the same instant my eyes found him, and he chose none of them. He was running toward our bus, toward the closed gate, toward the one solid, lit human thing between him and whatever was behind him. He hit the chain link with both hands, and he did not slow down to do it, did not put out his arms to brake the way a man does when he reaches a fence. He just collided with it, full body, hard enough that the whole span of fencing rang and shivered. And then he started to climb, fingers hooking the wire, boots scrabbling. And a grown man does not climb a fence like that, unless climbing is the only idea left in his head. And there is no thought behind it but up. I rolled my window down 2 inches. That was a mistake, but I did not know it yet. The night came in through that gap, And the first thing I noticed was the smell. And the smell was wrong too. Underneath the ordinary stadium smells of cut grass and frying oil and warm crowds, there was something else. Faint and low, copper and spoilage. The smell of a butcher's bin in summer. And my stomach turned over before my mind had words for why. "Open it," he was saying. Not shouting, that was the strange part. He was almost whispering it, breath sawing in and out. The way you talk when you are out of breath and out of hope at the same time, and you no longer have the air to spare for volume. "Open the gate. You have to let me know. No. Don't. Keep it shut. Keep it shut and drive." Two opposite instructions from the same mouth in the same breath. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count, lying awake with the ceiling fan turning. And I have decided that the man knew something I would only learn in pieces over the next several hours. He knew that he wanted to get out. Every cell of him wanted out. And he also knew that getting out was already impossible, and that the only useful thing left to him was to warn somebody. He used his last clear seconds to do both, and the contradiction in his voice is what told me, before I saw a single body, that this was not a fire, and not a bomb scare, and not a riot. Those things have a direction. People run away from them together, all the bodies pointing the same way like grass under wind. This had no direction. This had a man begging to be let through a gate. He was also begging me to keep shut. His eyes white all the way around, flicking between my face and the dark behind him. Behind me, our team captain, a 26-year-old named Matteo Lince, leaned over my shoulder. He moved up the aisle without my hearing him, that light way he had, and I felt him before I saw him, the warmth of another person close. He was the oldest player on the bus and the only one who had not gone straight to his phone. "Esteban," he said, very low, his voice almost in my ear. "What is he doing? Why is he—" He stopped. He had seen the man's face. I did not answer because the guard had stopped climbing. He had gotten one leg over the top rail, the wire biting into the inside of his thigh, and then he had simply stopped, frozen up there against the dark, like a coat thrown over a fence, and forgotten. And he was looking back at the tunnel mouth he had come from. His whole body went still in a way that bodies do not usually go still, all at once, like a held breath. I followed his eyes. The tunnel was a black rectangle set into a gray wall, the players' tunnel, the one the teams walk out of into the wall of noise. And I had walked teams toward 100 tunnels exactly like it. There was movement in it, not the movement of one person, the movement of a crowd that has lost the trick of moving like a crowd, all the bodies going at once, but none of them going together. A churn of shapes in the dark that came out into the apron lights and kept coming and did not stop at the edges the way people stop at edges. The way a crowd naturally pools and thins and respects the shape of a space. These did not respect anything. They came out and they spread, and they kept coming. More of them than the tunnel should have been able to hold. And they made that sound. The guard came down off the fence on our side. I had not seen him decide to. 1 second he was straddling the top rail. The next he was crumpled on the asphalt 3 feet from my door, on his hands and knees. And I understood that he had not climbed down at all. He had let go. He had looked at the tunnel and made some final arithmetic and let his hands open, and gravity had brought him the rest of the way. "Drive," he said through the 2 inches of open window. And now there was nothing left in his voice at all. No fear and no hope, just a flat thing scraped down to the bottom. He did not even look at me as he said it. He was looking past me, down the length of the bus, at the pale faces of the boys pressed to the glass. Whatever you do, don't open the doors. Don't open the doors for anyone. Not even me." Then he got up, pushing off the asphalt with both hands, and he ran along the fence line, away from the gate, away from us, toward a service road that curved off into the dark behind a row of generator sheds. And I never saw him again. And I have never stopped wondering whether he was trying to save himself or whether he had understood that a bus full of boys would draw the things behind him. And he was trying, in the last of his strength, to lead them somewhere else. I put us in reverse. The engine answered. That much at least was still mine, still obedient, the big diesel turning over and catching the way it had 10,000 times before. And the ordinariness of that sound was almost obscene against everything else. I had a full tank, 380 liters of diesel. Because I always fill before a venue arrival. Always, it is the one discipline that has never failed me in 30 years. A driver who runs dry at the wrong moment is a driver who has killed people. And I had decided as a young man that I would never be that driver. So I had a full tank, and I had a bus that weighed 18 tons empty and more with us all aboard. And I had a clear 40 meters of empty lane behind me in the mirrors. All I had to do was back out the way we came, swing the long body of her around in the court, and put this place in my mirrors forever. And the way we came was gone. I want to be precise, because the precision is the horror. When we arrived, no more than 6 or 7 minutes earlier, we had driven in through a vehicle checkpoint. A long concrete chute with a striped barrier arm and 2 glass booths. And a bored steward had waved us through with barely a glance at the Federation Pass on the windscreen. While I had been watching the guard, while every eye on that bus had been welded to the man on the fence, something had happened behind us. Quietly, hydraulically, without any sound, I had separated from the rest. The barrier had come down. Not the flimsy striped arm that any bus could snap, the barrier, a vehicle arrest barricade. The kind they install at major venues precisely so that a truck loaded with bad intentions cannot be driven into a crowd. A wedge of reinforced steel that rises straight up out of the road surface itself on hydraulic rams. It had risen. It was up. In my mirrors, where there should have been open lane and the lights of the city beyond, there was a black ramp of angled steel sitting across our exit at a height that would tear the front axle clean off the bus and leave us stranded and broken halfway through it. A beached thing with 23 boys spilling out into the dark. Someone had locked the stadium down, sealed it from the inside, and we had arrived exactly 4 minutes too late to be on the outside of that seal. I killed the engine. I made myself do it, my hand closing on the key, because a running engine was fuel burning and noise carrying, and neither of those served us now. The diesel rattle died and left us in a silence so complete that I could hear the cooling tick of the manifold under the floor, that small contracting metal sound. And under it, faint and growing, carried across the empty asphalt of the court, the sound of the thing that had come out of the tunnel. Not screaming. I keep telling people that because everyone expects screaming. And the absence of it is what made it unbearable. Not roaring either. A low, wet, layered murmur, like a stadium crowd heard from very far away through a thick wall. Except a crowd rises and falls and breathes together. It surges at a chance and groans at a miss. It is a living thing with moods. This sound never rose and never fell. It had no moods. It just continued, flat and even, and hungry, and without any human shape to it at all. The sound a great many wet mouths make when they are all working and none of them are speaking. And it was coming closer across the dark. and I could not yet see what was making it. 23 boys. One old man behind the wheel. 18 tons of steel around us. And a stadium that had decided, with all of us inside it, to close. Let me tell you who was on that bus, because by the end of the night, every single one of them mattered. And I owe them that much. Even the ones whose names I have buried for their family's sake. We were the visiting side. I will not name the country, and I will not name the tournament, because some of these families are still waiting for answers that nobody in any official capacity has ever been willing to give them. And I have decided I will not add my noise to the noise that has already hurt them enough. What I will tell you is that we were a small federation, a team that nobody expected past the group stage, the kind of squad that travels with hand-me-down kit and a budget airline behind the Federation crest. 23 players, ranging from a goalkeeper of 19 with a country boy's slow, careful way of speaking to our captain Mateo at 26, and a support staff of 7. There was Dr. Pana, our team physician, a heavy-set man of about 60, who had been with the Federation longer than some of the players had been alive, who carried boiled sweets in his jacket and called every one of the boys son, without ever seeming to mean it as anything but the simple truth. There was the kit manager, Sol, a wiry, restless man in his 40s who could repair anything with tape and wire and stubbornness, who never sat still, whose hands were always doing something. There was the assistant coach, a quiet former defender named Reza, the head coach having flown ahead the day before for a press obligation, which is the only reason that man is alive today to be quoted in articles about a night he never saw. There was a security liaison the Federation had hired for the tournament, a former soldier named Costa, broad through the shoulders and slow to speak, who I had watched all week the way a driver watches the men he shares the road with and decided I trusted, which turned out to be the only entirely correct read I made that whole night. And there was a media officer, a young woman named Inez, 28, sharp-faced and tireless, who never put her phone down, and who, in the end, was the reason any record of this exists at all. 30 souls. And the first thing I did wrong, in the first 90 seconds, was let them all start talking at once. Panic in an enclosed space is a physical thing. People who have not felt it think it is only an emotion, a feeling in the chest, but it is more than that. It has a temperature, the air warming with 30 bodies breathing too fast. It has a smell, sour sweat coming up sudden through cologne and deodorant. It has a sound that builds on itself, each frightened voice giving the next one permission. Within 90 seconds of the engine dying, half the boys were on their feet in the aisle. Half were bent over their phones with the screens lighting their faces blue from below. 2 were crying without seeming to know they were crying. And one of them, a center back named Yuri, 18 years old, big as a door and gentle as one too. The kind of boy who carried spiders outside instead of stepping on them, had begun pounding on the emergency window release at the rear with the flat of his hand, again and again, because he wanted out. He wanted air. He wanted the night and the open, and his mother. And I had to make a decision before he made it for all of us. Because that flat slapping was a sound, and sound, though I did not yet know the full price of it, was already gathering them toward us. I stood up out of my seat. I am not a large man, and I am not a loud one. I have a face people forget, and a voice that does not carry. But I had 30 years of authority in the way I had brought these boys through every storm and breakdown and 3 a.m. border crossing of this season, and I used all of it now, every ounce. "Sit down," I said. I did not shout it. I have learned that shouting gives frightened people something to push against. I said it the way you set down something heavy, with finality. Every one of you, sit and put your phones in your laps and look at me. It is a strange thing, but they did it. Not all at once, and not because of me alone. Matteo helped, moving down the aisle behind my voice, a hand on a shoulder here, a quiet word there, his calm doing the close work that my words could only begin. And Costa stood up at the very front of the bus and simply made himself a wall between the boys and the doors, arms folded across his chest, saying nothing at all. And his stillness in the middle of all that motion was worth more than any speech I could have given. The boys looked at him, at how unafraid his body was, and some of the fear went out of theirs. When it was quiet again, or quiet enough, I told them the truth. Because I've always found that the truth, said plainly and without dressing, calms people faster than comfort does. Comfort, they can tell, is a lie. The truth, even a terrible truth, gives the mind something solid to stand on. We came into a stadium that is locking itself down, I said. The exits are sealed. The way out behind us is blocked by a steel barrier I cannot drive through. I do not know why this is happening, but there are people out there in the dark who are not behaving like people anymore. And a man who works here told me, with what I think were close to his last words, not to open the doors for anyone, no matter what. So we are not going to open the doors. We are going to stay on this bus, where we have steel and height and a full tank of fuel under us. And we are going to think clearly, and we are going to wait for the right moment to leave when one comes. Now, phone's out. I want one of you on the news, one of you on the Federation emergency line, one of you on the embassy. Inez, you coordinate them. Nobody calls family yet, because I need the lines free for information, and because there is nothing your family can do tonight except lie awake terrified for you. That last part was cruel, and I knew it as I said it. And I watched it land on the youngest faces, but it worked. It gave them a wall to stop the fear against. Inez took charge of the phones with a focus that surprised me, all her restless energy suddenly pouring into one channel, dividing the boys into 3 small groups, each chasing one thread, writing down what they learned in the notes on her own phone, and the simple work of it, the having of a job, did more to settle that bus than anything I said. Costa came up the aisle and crouched beside my seat, bringing his head down to my level so he could speak low. Up close, I could see he had already done the arithmetic I had been too rattled to do, that his soldier's mind had been running the whole time. He stood there, being a wall. 380 liters, he said quietly, glancing at the fuel gauge that still glowed faintly on my dim dash. That's a lot of fuel and a lot of bus to get out of a place that has decided it doesn't want us to leave. What did the barrier look like, exactly? When you reversed? Wedge, I said. Hydraulic. The kind that comes up out of the road. It's all the way up. He nodded slowly, and something settled in his face, a conclusion arriving. Then someone in this building pressed a button, he said. Barriers like that don't come up by accident, Esteban. They don't come up on a timer at 8 in the evening on a match week. There's no fault condition that raises a vehicle barricade behind a bus that's already through the checkpoint. Somebody made a choice, and they made it after we drove in, while we were watching the man on the fence. Which means somebody is in a control room somewhere in this building with their hand on the controls. Which means somebody is alive in there. And somebody alive in there decided, with us standing in the court, that we were better off trapped than loose. I had not thought of it that way. And the thought was worse than the murmur outside, worse than the smell coming through my window. Until that moment, I'd been quietly telling myself a story, the kind of story you tell yourself to keep your hands steady. A story about a malfunction, a system failure, a stadium computer doing the wrong thing in a panic. Costa had just taken that comfort away from me with 3 sentences. There was a hand on the switch. The seal was not an accident of machinery. The seal was a decision made by a living mind. And that mind had looked at the situation and decided we belonged on the inside of it. "There will be a reason," Costa said, watching my face do its work. "There's always a reason. It might even be a good one. A reason I'd agree with if I were sitting where he's sitting. But it's his reason, not ours. And right now, his reason and our survival are pointed in two different directions." He looked back down the bus at the boys, at the blue-lit faces. "We need eyes. Before I trust any wall in this place to keep anything out, I want to know what's actually outside. I want to see it. We're deciding everything blind right now. And blind is how people die." That was the first turn of the night. And it came not from a sound or a body, but from a single understanding handed to me by a man who knew how the world's hard machinery worked. Somebody pressed a button. Everything I did afterward, every door I refused to open, and every one I forced, traced back to that. The danger outside the bus had a partner somewhere inside the building, a thinking partner, and a thinking enemy is a different problem than a hungry one. We got our eyes from the worst possible source. The bus had a reversing camera, a small fisheye lens mounted high on the rear above the engine bay, feeding a grainy screen set into my dash, the kind every coach has now. Saul, the kit manager, had figured out years ago how to keep it running off the auxiliary battery without the main engine turning. A small trick he used to watch the loading and unloading of the equipment bays so he could shout at the porters from the comfort of his seat. He flicked it on now, leaning over the back of my chair, and the dash filled with a green-tinged, distorted image of the apron behind us. And we all leaned in toward it together, breath held, and we saw them properly for the first time. There were perhaps 40 of them in the frame, and they had filled the space between the rear of the bus and the tunnel without my noticing, which meant they had crossed 60 meters of open asphalt in the few minutes since the engine died. And they had done it in that flat, near silence, without a single one of them raising the alarm to the others, because there was no alarm in them to raise. They did not move like a mob. A mob has a front and a back, a leading edge, a will, a target it surges toward. These moved like water finding a low place, the ones at the outer edges drifting almost aimlessly, swaying as they walked. The ones in the center pressing forward against nothing, all of them turning their heads in slow searching arcs, slow side-to-side sweeps, as though they were listening to the dark, as though the dark might tell them where the warm things were. Their clothing told the story of who they had been an hour before, and that was the part that turned my stomach worse than the rest. Stewards in high-vis vests, the reflective strips catching the street lamp. Vendors in branded aprons, one still with a tray strapped at his waist. A handful in the bright replica shirts of the home side. Fans who had come early for the atmosphere, for the warm-up, to soak in the day. And a small shape near the back, child-sized, that I made myself stop looking at and have never fully managed to stop seeing. "They're not attacking the bus," Mateo whispered, very close to my ear. "Esteban, they're right behind us, and they're not. Why aren't they attacking the bus?" It was Dr. Pana who answered, and his voice had changed. The genial old physician with the boiled sweets was gone, and in his place was a clinician. A man looking at a presentation he half recognized from some textbook of 40 years ago, and wholly feared. And the fear in his voice was the worst thing yet, because Pana was the one among us who was supposed to never be afraid of the body and what it did. "Because nothing on the bus is doing anything," he said slowly, leaning into the screen, his breath fogging it for a second. "Look at them. Watch how the heads move. They orient to sound, to movement, We are sitting completely still. The engine is off. The lights are off. The camera makes no noise. To them, right now, in their state, we are part of the building. We are a wall, a parked thing, a piece of the dark. He pressed 2 fingertips against the glass of the screen, as though he could touch them. Keep it that way. Whatever happens, whatever any of you feels, keep it that way. The moment we become a thing that moves, or shouts, or shows a light, we stop being a wall, and we become the low place. And then all of that water runs to us at once. And as if the night itself had been leaning over Pana's shoulder, listening, that was the exact moment one of the boys lost his nerve. It was Tomas, a winger, 17, the youngest outfield player we had, a slight, quick boy who had spent the whole season being protected by the older ones. He had been holding it together longer than I would have believed, and then he simply could not anymore. And his body did the thing bodies do under that kind of pressure. The need to act, to strike out, to do something against the unbearable feeling of being prey. And his fist came down against the window beside him. Once, hard, the flat of his hand and the heel of it against the laminated glass. It made a single flat boom, low and resonant, that traveled out through the body of the bus and into the night. On the dash screen, 40 heads turned toward the bus at once. I have seen synchronized movement in my life. I have stood in stadiums and watched 80,000 people rise as one body for an anthem, a single great animal of a crowd standing. But I had never seen 40 separate bodies pivot toward a single sound with the unanimity of one organism. No lag, no spread, no slow ones at the edges, all of them turning in the same instant as though they shared one nervous system. And I never want to see it again as long as I live. And the murmur changed for the first time since I had begun hearing it. It sharpened. The flat, even hunger of it acquired an edge, a pitch, a direction, and the loose drifting water of them gathered itself in toward the center and began to move as one thing toward the rear of the bus, toward us. And Dr. Pana said one word into the frozen silence inside. Down. We went down. 30 people folded below the line of the windows in the space of 2 seconds, knees on the rubber-matted floor, faces pressed toward the dirty aisle. And Costa was already moving, low and fast on his hands and knees, along the length of the bus, pressing his broad palm over a mouth here and a mouth there, where he found one starting to make a sound. And Mateo had clamped both his hands over Thomas's mouth from behind, pulling the boy's head back against his chest, because Thomas had begun to whimper, and a whimper now would carry through the thin glass as surely as a shout. We crouched in the dark belly of the bus, 30 of us, breathing through our mouths because mouth breathing is quieter. And we listened to them arrive. The first impact rocked us, and it was not a blow. That was somehow worse. It was a body, a single body, walking into the rear of the bus at full pace and simply not stopping, the way you would walk into a wall in the dark if you did not know the wall was there and felt no pain when you struck it. A heavy, soft thud against the steel, and then another beside it, and another. A soft, heavy, irregular drumming of flesh on metal as more of them arrived, and pressed up against the only thing in all that dark that had made a noise, leaning their whole dead weight against it. And the bus shifted on its suspension under them, a slow, sickening sway to one side and back, the springs groaning. On the floor beside me, Saul had his eyes squeezed shut, and his lips moving in something that was either a prayer or a list of the things he wished he had done differently. Inez had her phone screen pressed flat against her chest to smother the light. And even then, I could see by the set of her jaw that she had been recording the camera feed before we dropped, and that she had not stopped the recording, only hidden it. "They can't get in," I breathed to the boys nearest me, mouthing it more than saying it. And I meant it as comfort, and I did not yet know it was a lie. "Laminated glass, sealed doors. It's a security bus. They can't get in. We just have to be still. We just have to be quiet, and they'll lose us again." Costa crawled up beside me, and he put his mouth so close to my ear that I felt his breath. And what he said took the floor out from under the comfort I had just given the boys, took it clean away. "The luggage bays," he whispered, "underneath us. The side hatches that the bags go in. Are they locked, Esteban?" The luggage bays, the long compartments that ran the length of the bus beneath the passenger floor, where the kit and the medical cases and the boys' own bags rode. Where right now sat everything we owned, each one closed by a hatch that latched from the outside. A simple lift and slide latch a steward or a porter could open with one hand. A latch that a hand, pressing and patting and pulling at random in the blind searching way I had watched on the screen, might catch and lift entirely by accident, with no intent at all, simply because a dead hand happened to brush across it the right way. And the luggage bays were not sealed off from the cabin above. I knew this the way you know the worst thing about your own house. There was a hatch in the floor of the bus at the rear, an inspection port that Saul used to reach into the bays from inside when we were packed too tight to access them from outside. If they got into a bay, they would not be in the cabin with us, but they would be a single thin panel of plywood and carpet away, directly beneath our feet, in the dark. And the boys would hear them moving down there. And the boys, 18 and 17 and 19 years old, would not be able to stay silent with the dead scrabbling beneath the soles of their shoes. And then it would not matter in the slightest how strong the glass was. I locked them at the depot. Saul breathed from the floor, his eyes opening. 3 days ago, before we flew, I always lock them, every one. It's the first thing on my list. A pause, and in the pause, his face came apart. But Yuri went into the side bay at the last fuel stop for his phone charger. He didn't want to wake anyone. He went down himself. And I didn't watch him close it. I was checking the tires. I didn't see. Every head turned, slowly in the dark, toward Yuri. The big, gentle boy who had wanted out, who had pounded the rear window with his palm, who carried spiders outside. He was 18 years old, and his face in the faint blue bleed of a hidden phone was the face of a child who has just understood that the worst thing in the whole world tonight might be a thing that he himself did, and he could not remember. You could see him reaching back for it, ransacking his own memory and finding nothing certain there. He could not remember whether he had pushed the latch home. The drumming of bodies against the rear of the bus had not stopped while we whispered. And now, beneath it, threaded under it, I heard a new sound. A scrape, a long metal-on-metal rasp from below and behind, from the level of the road surface, from the luggage bays, where 40 pairs of dead hands were pressing and dragging blindly along the side of the bus. And one of those hands had found a latch and was, by pure blind accident, beginning to work it. We had to know which bay, and we had to know now, in the next minute. And there was only one way to find out that did not involve opening a door to the night. Saul knew the underside of the bus better than I knew the road. And he pointed silently at the rear floor hatch, the inspection port, and mimed lifting it just enough to put an eye to the gap and see down the dark length of the bays from inside. It was insane. It put a man's face inches from the place where they might already be. But the only other choice was to wait, blind, until a boy at the back screamed at a hand coming up through the floor. And I had learned in the last 10 terrible minutes that blindness was the thing in this place that killed you. I went instead of Saul. I want that on the record, as plainly as I can put it. Not because I was brave, because I was not. My hands were shaking the whole time. But because I was old, and Saul was useful. Saul could fix the door we might one day have to escape through. I could only drive a bus that could not move. If a hand came up through that hatch and closed on someone, I would rather it closed on the man the boys could most afford to lose. And that man was me. I crawled the length of the dark aisle on my elbows and knees, past the folded shapes of boys holding their breath, feeling their eyes on me in the dark. And I reached the rear floor hatch, and I worked my fingers under its lip, and I lifted it the width of 2 fingers, and I put my eye to the gap, into the colder air rising from below. The bay was black, but I'd already learned, in one night, that there is a black that is empty, and a black that is full, and they do not feel the same against your eye. I could hear breathing down there that was not breathing, that wet, open-mouthed working of air that did not pause for words or thought, that I would go on hearing in the worst minutes of every night for years afterward. And I could see, in the faint blue-gray bleed of a single street lamp far down the curving service road, leaking in through the gap of a hatch that was no longer fully shut, a hand, a single hand, a steward's hand, the high-vis cuff still buttoned neatly at the wrist, the watch still on it, reaching up from the open side hatch into the bay and patting at the dark air above it, the fingers spread wide, feeling, with the slow, blind patience of a thing that had all the time in the world and no fear left in it to spend. One bay was open, the center bay, and the inspection hatch I was holding shut against the floor with 2 trembling fingers opened directly down into that center bay. If I let go, it would feel the gap, the warm air, the smell of us pouring down. If I held on, my arms would fail within the hour, and then it would feel the gap anyway. And the latch I needed to throw to seal that inspection hatch from harm was not on my side. The bolt was on the bay side, the wrong side, meant to be reached from below. To seal us in safely, I would have to open the inspection hatch fully, reach my whole arm down into the bay where the padding hand was, find the open side hatch by feel, and pull it closed from the inside against the press of bodies leaning on the outside of the bus. All of it without making one sound that would tell the 40 dead pressed against our rear that the wall they were leaning on had something soft and warm and frightened inside it. I looked back down the aisle. Costa had crawled up close behind me, silent, and he had read the whole shape of the situation off my face in the gloom. He held up the kit man's heavy, long rubber torch, the big one Saul kept for night repairs, unlit, holding it like a club. A weapon, if it came to that. Then he held up his other hand, fingers spread, and slowly closed it into a fist, and I understood. I'm with you, on your count, whatever happens. I have made many decisions in 30 years on the road, decisions about ice and fog and brakes and the lives of the people behind me. I had never made one like this. I counted to 3 with my fingers tapping silent against the floor where only Costa could see them. 1, 2, and on 3, I threw the inspection hatch fully open into the dark. The hand was faster than a hand has any right to be. The instant the hatch swung up and the warmer air of the cabin breathed down into the cold bay, carrying the smell of 30 living bodies, the steward's hand stopped its blind padding and shot upward toward the new opening, toward the warmth, toward the smell of us. And it closed around my forearm before I'd even fully extended it down into the gap. The grip was wrong, in a way I cannot make you feel with words, no matter how I try. It was not the grip of a man holding on, because a man's grip negotiates. It finds the shape of your arm. It slips and adjusts. There is a person in it, making small, constant decisions. There was no person in this. It simply tightened, evenly, all the way around the bone of my forearm. The way a machine closes, a vise turned by a motor that does not know or care what it is closing on. And the wet, working breath below me rose and became a sound. A long, rising, tubular moan that started low and began to climb steadily toward the volume that would bring the other 40 around the side of the bus and into the open center bay in a flood. And then it would be over for all of us. I did not pull back. Pulling back was what its whole weight was set for, what it expected. And there was nothing on the end of my pull, but more of it. Instead, I drove my arm down, toward it, deeper into the bay, taking the dead thing by a surprise it could not feel. Folding myself half through the open hatch into the cold and the smell. And with my free hand, I found by feel the cold edge of the open side hatch, where the street lamp leaked through. And I hauled it shut. The latch did not catch. Of course it did not catch. The body of the steward was half inside the opening, its shoulder filling the gap. And the hatch slammed into that shoulder and stopped dead. And the rising moan broke into a shriek, high and ragged. The exact sound I had risked everything to prevent. The sound that would end us. And I had perhaps 3 seconds before the rest of them came around the corner of the bus and turned that center bay into a mouth. Costa saved us. He came over the top of me in the dark, one knee landing beside my hip, the long torch reversed in both his fists, and he drove the heavy steel butt of it down through the gap of the inspection hatch onto the wrist that held my arm. Once, with the full, committed weight of a man who had broken things before for a living and felt nothing about doing it again. And the bone gave way with a sound I felt more than heard, and the grip released, the fingers springing open all at once. And in the same continuous motion, Costa shifted his weight and kicked the side hatch with the flat of his boot, hard. And it slammed home over the shoulder, and the bolt through and seated and held, and the steward's hand and forearm, severed clean at the broken wrist by the closing steel, dropped down onto the floor of the bay and lay there in the street lamp light. And the hand on the end of it was still moving, still flexing, still opening and closing, still padding slowly at the empty air of the bay floor, with no body attached to it at all. I dragged myself backward out of the hatch and back into the cabin, my arm dead and ringing where the grip had been. And Costa pulled the inspection hatch down flat, and Sol's hands were already there, sliding the inside bolt home. And we 3 lay on the rattling floor of the dark bus, with that single image burning itself permanently behind my eyes, the open hand on the severed forearm opening and closing in the dark beneath the feet of 23 sleeping boys. And I understood, lying there, the thing that Dr. Pana had been too careful and too kind to say out loud. This was not a poison, and not a gas, and not a panic that would pass. The hand did not need the man. Whatever was running these bodies did not live in the brain, where man lives, where you could end it cleanly with one good blow. It lived everywhere, in every separate inch of them, in the meat of the hand itself. And a piece of one of them was now sealed inside our own bus, in the bay directly below the boys, and it would go on opening and closing forever, or until the meat itself rotted off the bone, because nothing else could stop it. Outside, the moan I had failed to prevent had done its work, but not the work I had feared. The 40 bodies pressed against the rear of the bus had heard their fellow shriek and had surged around the side toward the bay. And finding it sealed again and silent, finding no movement and no light and no warmth they could reach, finding only steel that had gone, still and quiet once more. They began, slowly, with no memory holding them to the spot, to lose interest. The drumming on the steel slackened, blow by blow. The pressure came off the suspension, and the bus settled back level on its springs with a long groan. On the dash camera, the green shapes began drifting back from the bus by ones and twos, their searching heads turning away into the dark, the water flowing back out of the low place to go and find some other one. Stillness had saved us a second time. We had survived only by becoming again a wall. And I understood now that this would be the whole shape of the night, this terrible, passive arithmetic. To live, we had to be a thing that did nothing, made nothing, wanted nothing. And the moment any one of 30 frightened people forgot that, even for the length of one slapped window, it would all come for us at once. Inez crawled up to me when it was over, when the camera showed the court emptying again. Her hands were shaking visibly, but her voice was not. And I marked that, the way she had separated the two, the body's fear from the work of the mind. "Esteban, I have signal," she whispered. 2 bars. It keeps dropping, but it holds. And I have someone. The Federation emergency line connected me to a man. But he's not Federation. He's not anyone I should have reached. He's in the building, Esteban. He's somewhere inside the stadium, in a control room. And he says he's been trying to reach our bus since before the barrier went up. She held the cracked screen out to me in the dark, shielding its light with her cupped hand. "Read it. Read what he sent before he'd talk." On the cracked screen was a single line of text, sent from a number that carried the host country's own dialing code. And the words on it made the floor of the bus tilt under me worse than any walking body had managed. The message read, "I am the one who sealed you in. Do not try to leave. If you breach the perimeter, you will doom everyone in this city. Stay on the bus. I will explain." Halloran, venue operations. So now I knew the name of the hand on the switch. Halloran. And I knew that the man who had trapped us either believed or wanted very much for me to believe. That our cage was the only thing standing between this stadium and the streets and homes of the city beyond it. And I had to decide, there in the dark, with a severed hand flexing in the bay below 23 boys, whether the man who had locked us in with the dead was a monster who had condemned us, or the last sane voice left in a building full of the dead, doing the one terrible necessary thing that everyone else had been too frightened to do. I told Costa to read the message first before I let myself answer it, because I no longer trusted my own judgment after the bay. And his was the only judgment aboard that I trusted more than my own. He took the phone and read the words once, then again, his lips not moving, his eyes going still the way still water goes when something moves underneath it. Then he gave it back and said the thing that organized the entire rest of that night, that gave it a shape I could work inside. "He's not lying about the perimeter," Costa said, very low. "Or at least he doesn't believe he's lying. Listen to me, Esteban, because this matters. A man who's lying to keep you calm tells you that help is coming. He tells you hold tight, the cavalry's almost here, everything's going to be fine. That's the lie of comfort. This man isn't doing that. This man is telling you that if you leave, the city dies. That's not a lie you tell a frightened stranger to soothe him. That's a fact a frightened man blurts out when he's been alone with a terrible thing for too long and finally has someone to say it to." He let that sit a moment. which is worse for us, because it means he believes it all the way down. And a man who believes it that way will fight us to keep us in here. And it means he might be right. I made the call. Inez dialed it and set it to speaker at the very lowest volume the phone would allow. And we three put our heads together over the little speaker in the dark while the boys watched us from the floor with white faces. And a man's voice came through, thin and crackling and exhausted, an educated voice frayed at every single edge, the voice of a man who had been carrying something alone for hours. "You're the bus," Halloran said, before I had said anything but my name. "The visiting team. Oh God, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I didn't see you come through the vehicle checkpoint until you were already inside the perimeter line. You were already in. And by the time I saw you on the camera, I'd already started the seal sequence. And if I'd dropped the barrier to let one vehicle back out, I'd have had to abort the whole protocol and start again. And there were 4,000 of them coming up out of the South Concourse stairwells while I watched. 4,000. I had a choice in front of me. And the choice was one bus or the city. And I chose the city. I would choose it again right now if you put the button back under my hand. I need you to understand that I chose it before I ask you for anything, because I won't lie to you. I haven't got the strength left to manage a lie on top of everything else." "What is this?" I said, keeping my voice as flat and steady as I could because the boys were listening. "What is happening to them? The people out there?" "I don't know. Not exactly. Nobody does. Not yet." His breath came ragged down the line. It came up through the south stands during the warm-up, into the early crowd. And it went person to person faster than anything I've ever seen or heard of. Faster than anything should be able to move through a crowd. We think it's contact, fluid, not airborne, or you'd all already be gone. And I'd be gone, you understand. We're all still breathing the same building's air. Bite, scratch, blood in the eyes or the mouth. That's the read from the medical team's last calls. Minutes from exposure to the change. Not hours. Minutes. The medical team radioed it in, described it, and then in the middle of describing it, the medical team became part of it, on an open channel, while I listened. A long, shaking breath that I felt in my own chest. I'm in the operations control room, 4th level of the west stand. Behind a fire door I've welded shut with a chair through the handles. I have the master controls for every barrier, gate, shutter, and fire door in this entire building in front of me on one console. And the local civil authority told me to seal it and hold it sealed until a containment team could arrive. Because if this gets into the transit station under the East Concourse, it's in the metro. And if it's in the metro, it's in every district of this city by morning. And after that, there's no stopping it anywhere. So I sealed it. 40,000 seats. Everything that was inside these walls when I pressed it is still inside these walls. Including you. Including, I'm sorry to say, me. "How long?" Costa asked, leaning toward the phone, his voice level and professional in a way I was grateful for. "How long until the containment team reaches you?" There was silence on the line. Not a deadline. A breathing, present silence. And that silence was itself the entire answer before he gave it. "They're not coming," Halloran said at last. And I heard the thing in his voice that meant he was only now, in saying it to us, letting himself fully believe it. "Are they? You'd have heard helicopters by now. There'd be lights on the perimeter, vehicles, a cordon. There's nothing. I've been watching the external cameras for 3 hours, and the only movement outside these walls is ordinary traffic on the ring road. People driving home, no idea." A pause. I was told 4 hours. That was 3 hours ago. And the story keeps changing every time the line connects. I think I've started to think that they're still arguing somewhere about whether a containment team is even the right move, or whether the right move is just to leave the seal up, leave the building sealed, and let it burn itself out inside these walls where it can't reach anyone. I think we might be the containment, gentlemen. I think the four of us on this phone, and a busload of boys, and a building full of the dead, might be the entire plan. The whole strategy, a locked door and time. That was the midpoint of the night, the place where the whole story I'd been telling myself quietly turned over in the dark and showed me its underside. I had believed, all the way up to that voice, even through the bay and the hand, that we were survivors waiting to be rescued. That somewhere out in the night, the world was marshaling its strength. That men in vehicles were coming to pull us from the wreck of this place, because that is what the world does. The truth Halloran handed me down that crackling line was the exact opposite, and it was colder than the bay had been. We were not the people the world was racing to save. We were the price the world had quietly, somewhere in a room we would never see, already decided it was willing to pay. The seal was not protecting us until help arrived. The seal was the help. There was no other help behind it, and we were standing on the inside of it. I looked down the dark aisle at the boys, lit faintly blue from below by phones held in their laps. At Tomas, 17, who had slammed the window and could not stop shaking. At Yuri, 18, who could not remember a hatch and would carry that not remembering for the rest of his life. At Mateo, who had kept them all from breaking apart simply by refusing to break himself. At the 19-year-old goalkeeper, whose name I'm still protecting because his mother still writes to me at the new year, every year, with photographs. Children. The whole busload of them children by the measure of any life but the one they had chosen. And a tired, decent man in a control room 4 levels above us had weighed them against a city full of strangers and found, correctly, by any arithmetic I could honestly do myself, that a city weighs more than a bus. And here is the thing I have to tell you. The thing I have never once managed to make peace with in all the time since. I understood him. Costa had been right twice over. I believed that Halloran believed it. And more than that, sitting there, I believed it too. If the seal broke and the thing reached the metro, the arithmetic was not 23 boys against a city. It was 23 boys against everyone, against every district and every family asleep in it, against the next city down the line, and the one after that. I am a man who has spent his entire working life moving precious cargo safely from one place to another and delivering it whole. And the one time it mattered more than any delivery I had ever made, the math told me that my cargo had to stay inside the fire. So I did not rage at Halloran down the line, the way some part of me wanted to. I asked him a question instead, and it is the one thing I am genuinely proud of from that entire night. The only clear-headed thing I did. You said the containment plan might be to let it burn out inside the walls, I said. Things that burn, burn out. So tell me, what does burning out look like? When does it stop moving? How does this end if no one comes? Because I had learned something in the bay that Halloran, sealed alone in his control room, watching it all from a distance on screens, had not yet learned. I had learned that the hand did not stop. I had a piece of one of them sealed in my own luggage bay, and it was still moving down there in the dark. And a thing that does not stop does not burn out the way Halloran was hoping. A thing that does not stop only waits. The line was quiet for a moment, and then Dr. Pana, who had crawled up the aisle beside us and been listening to all of it with his old physician's stillness, reached out and took the phone gently from my hand. And when he spoke, the genial man with the boiled sweets was fully gone. And in his place was a doctor returning. at what he must already have suspected was the very end of his life. To the one thing in the world he had always known how to do well. "Mr. Halloran," he said, "this is the team doctor. Listen to me carefully, because this may be the most important thing either of us says tonight. I need you to tell me everything your cameras have shown you about the ones who turned first. Not the recent ones, the very first ones, from the warm-up crowd 3 hours ago. Are they still moving the way the new ones move, or have they changed? Are they slower, stiffer? Are any of them down, on the ground, and not getting back up?" "The first ones," Halloran said slowly, and I could hear him turning in his chair to look at his bank of screens. Yes, now that you ask it that way. There's a cluster of them in the South Concourse, the first cluster where it started. And they don't roam anymore. They've gone still. They stand in one place. They sway like they're standing in a wind that isn't there. They react to sound. Their heads still turn. But they don't pursue it the way the fresh ones do. They don't run. I thought they'd just lost track of the others. I thought they were finished, that they'd fed and stopped. I didn't think about it being. They are not finished, Pana said, and there was something terrible and gentle in how certain he was. The certainty of a man reading the last page of a book he has read before. They are stiffening. Rigor, or something close enough to it that the difference doesn't matter to us tonight. The tissue is failing even as the agent keeps driving it. Esteban told me about the hand in our bay, the one that still moves with no body. That tells us the agent doesn't need the body whole to function. But here is the mercy in it, gentlemen. The only mercy this thing has given us. The body still rots. The agent can animate dead tissue. But it cannot stop dead tissue from decaying. And dead tissue decays whether it is walking or lying still. The first ones turned 3 hours ago. By morning, they will be too stiff to chase a man. By tomorrow night, the fresh ones outside our bus will be where those first ones are now. It does burn out, Mr. Halloran. Not because the agent dies. The agent may never die. It burns out because the meat it is wearing falls apart faster than it can use it up. He handed the phone back into my hand, his fingers cold. Your seal is correct. Hold it. Hold it 3 days, perhaps 4, and you will have a building full of things too ruined and too stiff to climb a fence or work a latch, and then a city beyond the walls that will never know how close it came to ending. The boys and I would only ask you for one thing in return for agreeing with you. Anything, Halloran said down the line, and I believed that he meant it absolutely. Name it. After what I've done to you, name anything I can give. Keep us alive inside the seal, Pana said simply. You do not have to let us out. We agree with you that we should not be let out, that we cannot risk being the ones who carry it through your barrier. But there is a difference, Mr. Halloran, a real difference between a seal that contains us and a seal that murders us by neglect. And the difference is entirely in whether you help us survive 3 days in here, or whether you leave us to the bay hatch and the breaking glass and the slow failure of one frightened boy's nerve. Be the man who held the line and saved the boys. Both at once, not one or the other. You can be both. I have carried Dr. Pana's voice on that line with me for a long time now, and I expect I will carry it until I am done. He found, in about 90 seconds, with the dead pressed all around us, the only path through the whole impossible night. The one path that asked nothing dishonorable of a single person on it. Don't break the seal, don't break the city. But don't let the seal be an execution carried out by inaction. Survive inside it. Make the cage into a shelter. It was the kind of clear, complete thinking that I have come to believe only arrives to a man who has somewhere quietly stopped being afraid of his own death and I understood. Listening to him hand Halloran away to be a good man instead of a monster. That Pana had decided sometime in the last hour that he himself was not going to walk out of the stadium alive, and that the decision had freed him entirely. Halloran took it. I heard him weep with relief down the line. And it was a particular kind of weeping, the kind a man does when he has been carrying a weight he was sure made him a monster. And someone has just shown him how to carry the very same weight as a duty instead. And then the operations man in him surfaced up through the grief, the competent professional reasserting himself. And he began to give us the building. "All right," he said, and you could hear him wiping his face, sitting up, pulling a console toward himself. "All right. If you're staying in there 3 days, then I can make it survivable. But you have to understand my problem from this chair, because every shutter I lift and every door I open is another path the dead can find through this building. I have to manage what I open and when, like locks on a canal. So listen. Your bus is in the West Vehicle Court. I can see you on camera 40 meters to your left as you sit facing the closed gate. There's a vehicle maintenance bay, a roller door, the big one. I can lift it from here and drop it again in about 8 seconds. Inside that bay is a sealed garage workshop with its own washroom and a tap that still runs on the building supply, and a mezzanine office above it with a steel door that locks from the inside. It is, without any question, the single safest room in this building that I have a clear path to get you to, but... A pause. But you have to cross 40 meters of open court on foot in the dark to reach it. And right now, there are between 50 and 70 of them, standing and drifting, in that court between your bus and that roller door. And the moment you crack a door on that bus, the very second, you stop being a wall. There it was, the decision that the whole long night had been driving toward without my seeing it. Stay on the bus, where we were safe tonight, where the steel had held and the glass had held. But where the center bay was breached and taped shut around a thing that still moved, where the fuel would not last 3 days of running the heater against the cold, and where the dead would surely find us again the very next time a boy lost his nerve, which a boy would because they were boys and the night was long. Or cross 40 meters of dark full of the dead, on foot, on a stranger's count, on the word of a man we had known for 15 minutes, and who had already decided once to trap us, into a room none of us had ever seen, on the promise of 3 days of running water and a door that locked from the inside. I put it to them. I will not stand here and pretend I decided it alone, like some captain in a film. I gathered them all in the dark, every one, the boys and the staff together, crouched low below the windows. And I told them exactly what Halloran had offered and exactly what it would cost to take it, every part of it, the 40 meters and the 70 bodies and the count we'd be trusting our lives to. And I told them one more thing. I told them that I would drive this bus straight into that steel barrier and tear its whole front off and spill us all out into the open night, before I would force a single one of them to make that crossing against his will. Because that was the one thing, the only thing, that I had decided I would not do. I would not become the seal that murdered them, either. If we went together, and we went chosen. It was Mateo who answered for the team, and it was the answer of a captain. The kind that earns a man the armband for reasons that have nothing to do with how he plays. The bus is where we got lucky, he said, looking around at the faces. Twice now. And luck runs out, Esteban. It always runs out. You taught me that yourself on the road this season. The room is where we stop relying on luck and start making our own for 3 days. We go for the room. He let his eyes move across the youngest ones, Tomas, Yuri, the goalkeeper. But not all at once. If there are 70 of them in that court, then 30 of us pouring out of one door is exactly the low place that all that water runs to. The doctor said it himself. We go in waves. Fastest first, to cross quick and draw their eyes if it comes to that. Slowest in the middle, protected front and back. Strongest last, with the strength left to carry anyone who goes down. He had been a footballer his entire life, since before he could properly read. He thought in runs and overlaps, and the geometry of bodies moving through a contested space, under pressure. The angles of it, the timing, where the gaps would open and for how long. And it was exactly, precisely, the kind of thinking that the next hour was going to demand of us. And I saw Costa look at the young man with something new in his face. A soldier's respect for another man's instinct. If you've stayed with me this far into the night, I want to ask you something. And I genuinely want your answer down in the comments. 40 meters of open dark, somewhere between 50 and 70 of them standing in the way. A bus that's safe tonight but doomed by the weekend. And a locked room you have never seen on the word of a man who already chose once to trap you. Do you cross, or do you stay on the wall and pray the seal holds 3 more days? Tell me where in the world you're listening from while you turn it over, because I have always wondered who rides along with me on nights like this one. We made our plan over the next hour, low and careful. And the planning itself was its own kind of mercy. The only mercy we could give the boys. Because a frightened mind that has been handed a problem to solve is no longer a mind that is only screaming at the dark. It has something to grip. Halloran became our eyes and our timer both. From his bank of cameras up on the 4th level, he could see the entire court laid out beneath him. The whole geography of the dead in it. And he talked us through it in a low, steady voice, where they clustered thickest, where the floods of them thinned to a trickle, and the strange, slow, tidal thing they did that none of us ever fully understood. Every few minutes, for reasons we could only guess at, some sound from the concourses beyond the court, some draft of warm air, or perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps the dead simply have tides the way the sea does. The bulk of them would drift toward the south wall of the court, away from the lane between our bus and the roller door. And the lane would open up to a relative thinness of 8 or 10 bodies. And that thinness, Halloran judged, watching it cycle again and again, lasted somewhere between 40 and 60 seconds before the water flowed back across it. 40 to 60 seconds to move 30 people across 40 meters of open ground in waves. It could not be done in one tide. It was not physically possible to get 30 people across in under a minute, not with the slow ones among us. It would take 3 tides, perhaps 4, and that meant the cruelest part of the whole plan. Between each tide, the people who had not yet crossed would have to stand utterly still and silent in the open court. In the dark, while the dead flowed back over the very ground they were about to cross, sometimes within arm's reach, and wait for the next tide to open the lane again. The early waves would be inside the maintenance bay, holding the inner door, listening. The late waves would be standing frozen in the open dark, a body's length from the dead, unable to so much as shift their weight, waiting. Costa built the waves with a soldier's care, sketching it in the dust on the floor with one finger by the light of a hooded phone. 8 in the first wave, the fastest boys, the wingers, and the youngest legs, to sprint the full 40 meters and get the roller door's interior held open for the rest. Saul went with that first wave, even though he was no sprinter, because he was the only one of us besides me who truly understood door mechanisms. And Halloran wanted a man inside who could work the manual override the moment the remote lift stalled, which Halloran warned us it might, the system being old and strained. 8 in the second wave, the solid middle of the squad. 7 in the third, the slower boys and the support staff. Dr. Pana among them, despite his quiet protests that he should go last, because I would not have that old man's weight on the 4 of us in the final wave. And I told him so. And he looked at me for a long moment, and then nodded. And I should have understood, from how easily he gave in, what he was already planning. And the last wave was the 4 strongest left standing. Costa, Mateo, Yuri, and me, with the unlit torches in our fists and the kit bags emptied of clothing and restuffed with anything heavy we could find. Wrenches and water bottles and tools, not to fight with, never to fight, but to throw, to make noise in the wrong direction and pull the dead's eyes away if a boy went down. We could not take the severed hand with us, and we could not leave it loose. Saul's last act inside the bus before he joined the first wave at the door was to wrap the bay's inspection port in 3 full rolls of duct tape, sealing the floor hatch flat, and then drag and pile the heaviest equipment cases on top of it, weighing it down so that the thing moving in the dark below could never, by any accident of its endless patient flexing, work its way up into a bus none of us would ever ride again. I have thought about that hand far more than is healthy for a man my age. It is still down there, I expect, in a bus that was never recovered, opening and closing at nothing in the dark beneath the seats where the boys had slept. We waited for a strong tide. Halloran watched his screens and counted us down through Inez's phone, propped on the dash on speaker at a whisper, and when he finally said go, on the lowest breath a man can put a word on, I opened the bus door for the first time since the engine died. The pneumatics hissed, far too loud in my ears, and the night came fully in, the cold of it and the smell of it thick now, copper and rot and something underneath that I had no name for. And the first 8 boys went out into it like a starting gun had fired in their blood, low and fast and silent, the way they had been trained their whole lives to move off a line, except that the touch line now was 40 meters of standing dead. I will not narrate every single step of that first crossing, because some of it I could not see from the bus, and some of it I will not describe out of plain respect for the families who may one day read this. I will tell you that the first wave reached the roller door. I will tell you that the remote lift stalled at the last meter, just as Halloran had feared, the old motor straining and stopping with the door's edge a hand's breadth off the ground, and that Saul dropped flat and got his fingers under it and hauled it up that last meter by main strength with 2 boys helping him, the tendons standing out in his thin arms, and that 8 boys rolled under it into the black mouth of the maintenance bay, and the door came down behind them, and the court did not erupt. I will tell you that the tide then flowed back, slow and blind, over the very ground those boys had just run across, and that we stood in the dark of the open bus door and watched 70 dead bodies drift across the path our children had just used, and that not one of those bodies knew, and that this was somehow the most frightening thing of the entire night, that you could pass within arm's reach of them in perfect stillness, and they would not know you for living. But the instant you became a warm, moving thing with a heart that wanted to go on beating, they would all know it at once. Second wave, second tide, 8 more boys gone under the door. But halfway across, one of them, a midfielder, clipped a discarded glass bottle with the edge of his boot in the dark, and it went skittering and ringing across the concrete, loud as a bell in a church. And 4 of the dead nearest the lane turned their heads toward the sound and began to drift toward it, toward the boy. And Costa, standing beside me in the bus door, made a decision in the space of a quarter of a second that I will honor for as long as I live. He took one of the weighted kit bags and he threw it. A long, flat, hard throw out into the dark toward the south wall, the opposite direction. And it landed and tumbled and skidded and made a long rattling clatter against the concrete. And the 4 dead heads turned away from the boy and toward the new and louder sound. And the boy reached the door and went under it. And Costa had spent one of our precious 3 diversions to buy that one boy's life, and did not regret it for a second. We had learned by then the one true rule of that place, the only currency it traded in: sound. Spend it to move their eyes. There was nothing else in the whole economy of the night. The 3rd wave was the hard one. The slower boys, the support staff, old Dr. Pana with his bad knees and his 60 years and his heavy frame. The tide that came for them was weaker than the others, the lane staying thicker than Halloran liked. And his voice on the phone went tight as he watched it, holding us, while a boy in the 3rd wave shifted his weight on the bus step in the pure agony of the waiting. And then at last, a stronger tide rolled in, and Halloran breathed go, and they went. And they were slow. God forgive me, they were so slow against the memory of the boys. An aging man's running. And the lane was already closing again as they crossed. And Dr. Pana, 60 years old and heavy, and his breath already gone by the 10th meter, began to fall behind his own wave. He fell behind, and a single one of the dead, a steward in a high-vis vest just like the one whose hand was in our bay, drifted into the lane in the gap between Pana and the door. Not because it had seen him, but only because the slow tide had carried it there by chance. And Pana, trying to swerve around it in the dark, checked his stride and his bad knee buckled, and he went down hard on it, onto the concrete with a sound, a grunt, and a slap of palms on stone that the steward heard. I was already moving. I was out of the bus door and into the court against every single thing we had planned, against my own orders. An old man running toward a fallen old man across ground I had sworn to cross only in the last wave, because some things are simply stronger than any plan a man can make. But Costa caught me. He got a fist into the back of my collar and held me, an immovable iron weight, and he put his mouth to my ear and said the worst true thing that anyone has ever said to me in my life. "If you go now," he said, very low and very fast, "the whole court turns at the noise of 2 of us, and we lose the last wave and we lose him both for nothing. He's already in it, Esteban. He's already there. Watch what he does. Just watch." I watched. And I watched Dr. Pana, down on one knee in the dark with a steward turning toward him, do the bravest thing I have ever seen a human being do. He did not scramble up and run for the door, which was right there, which would have brought the steward and then the whole returning tide of them after him, straight into the maintenance bay, where 18 of our boys now sheltered behind one stalled door. He stayed down. He chose in a single second, with the thing already turning toward him, to keep the door safe. And then he reached into his own medical bag, the bag he had flatly refused to leave behind on the bus. And he took something out of it that I could not see in the dark. And he stood up, deliberately, fully and slowly upright, into the open, where every dead thing in the court could find him. And he began to walk, south, away from the door, away from the boys, straight into the thickest part of the returning tide, with his arms held slightly out from his sides, making himself the largest, most obvious, most upright and moving warm thing in that entire court. He drew them. He turned his own body into the low place, on purpose, with full knowledge, and the water of the dead ran to him, all of it, the lane between the door and the bus blowing wide open in the wake of his sacrifice. Every dead head in the court turning south toward the big, slow-moving man. And Halloran's voice cracked clean in half as he saw it on his screen and understood it. Last wave, go. The lane's open, the whole lane's open. Go now, go now. And Costa released my collar and shoved me forward into the open. And we went, the four of us, straight down a corridor of clear ground that an old physician had opened with his own body and his own life. And the last thing I saw as I reached the roller door and turned my head was Dr. Pana disappearing into the very center of the tide, of the dead, with his arms raised out from his sides like a man conducting a great orchestra, still walking, still drawing them on, still leading every one of them away from the boys. And I will tell you, because his family deserves to know it, that he never once made a sound. He gave them his body, but he would not give them a single cry, because he knew the boys behind the steel could hear everything in that court, and he would not let the last thing they heard of him be a scream that would haunt them. The roller door came down. Saul threw the manual lock and then jammed a long wrench through the gear teeth for good measure. And we were inside, all of us who were going to be 29 where there had been 30, in a sealed concrete garage that smelled of cold engine oil and standing water and our own animal terror, with a tap that ran when Saul tried it and a steel door on the mezzanine above that locked from the inside. And the thing that the old doctor had bought us with his life and his silence was 3 days. He gave us 3 days, and he gave them to us on purpose, deliberately. And he timed it down to the second, like the surgeon he had once been, so that no one else would have to die to pay for the room. There is no debt like that one. I have never found the bottom of it. I have to tell you what those 3 days cost us, because the room was not the end of the night. The room was where the real test began, the quiet one, the one that asked harder questions than any walking corpse ever could. Halloran had been right that the maintenance bay was the safest place he could reach us. He had been right about the tap, which ran cold and rusty and then clear. He had been right about the mezzanine door, which locked with a heavy deadbolt that Saul checked 4 times. And the dead could not get in through the roller door. Not once Saul had jammed the manual override with a wrench through the gear teeth, so that no random press of dead hands from the court outside could ever lift it. What none of us had reckoned with, for nas saris, the sun, what no plan could possibly have reckoned with, was the question of who else might already be inside the safest room in the building, before us, in the dark, and what that person might have carried in with them. We found him on the second day. By then we had organized ourselves, made beds of moving blankets and tarpaulins on the concrete, set a rationing of the water, established a corner for a latrine and a corner for the youngest to sleep where it was warmest near the dead engine of a forklift. We had begun, in the small way that frightened people do, to make the room a place where life happened. And on the second day, a man came down the mezzanine stairs into the weak light of our single battery lamp, and the boys nearly killed him out of pure, startled animal terror. And Costa got his body between them and the stranger in the half-second before it happened. His name was Peter. He was a stadium electrician, perhaps 40 years old, grave-faced and hollow-eyed. And he had locked himself in the mezzanine office at the very start of it all, before the seal, before us. And he had been up there, in the dark above our heads the entire time we were establishing ourselves in the garage below, too frightened to call out, listening to us, trying to decide from our voices and our movements whether we were the living or the dead, before he finally found the courage to come down the stairs into the light. He was, by every measure, one of us, another trapped, terrified, surviving soul. And we should have been nothing but glad to find him alive. But Petter had been scratched. He had not told us, because he had not turned. And because he had spent 2 days alone in that dark office slowly, desperately convincing himself that a scratch was only a scratch, that he was somehow the exception, that whatever Dr. Pana would have called the agent had simply not taken in him. He had a long, shallow scrape down the inside of his left forearm, 2 days old now, scabbed dark and angry red at the edges. And when Costa's eyes found it, the whole room went silent. Every one of us. Because we had all heard Pana on that phone line. Minutes from exposure to turn, not hours. And Petter had been scratched 2 days ago and had not turned. And that should have been a miracle, a sign of hope. And instead, it was the most frightening thing of the entire ordeal. More frightening than the hand in the bay, because it meant we did not understand the rules nearly as well as we had told ourselves we did. And we no longer had a doctor to tell us what the new rule was. This was the deeper layer of it, the thing hidden underneath the thing we thought we understood. Pana had told us bite and scratch and fluid, minutes to turn. Petter was living, breathing, walking proof that sometimes it was not minutes, that sometimes it was slow, that sometimes it crept along in a man for days while he looked and spoke and grieved exactly like a living person, until the hour it finally decided to wake. And we were trapped in a sealed room, the last room, the end of all the crossings, with a man among us who was either truly immune or a clock that none of us could read the face of, and 28 other lives depending entirely on someone being able to tell the difference, and no doctor left alive to do it. I called Halloran. By then the phone Ines had been guarding had 11% of its battery left, and we were rationing it down to one short call every 6 hours. The phone wrapped in cloth to keep it warm so the cold would not eat the charge faster. And I spent one of those precious calls on this. I told him about Petter, about the scratch, about the 2 days. There was a long silence down the line. And then Halloran told me the thing he had been holding back from us. The thing he had learned from the fragments of civil authority radio traffic he could still pick up in his control room and had not wanted to lay on top of everything else we were carrying. There are slow ones, Halloran said quietly. The authority channel mentioned it before it went dark. Most turn in minutes, like the doctor said. But a few carry it for days. And the slow ones are worse, Esteban. Not better. That's the thing they kept repeating. The warning. When a slow one finally turns, it turns faster and stronger than any of the fresh ones. Like the agent has been saving itself up the whole time, banking it. They told the cordon teams to watch for anyone who'd been exposed and hadn't turned, because those are the ones who breach containment. They walk among the living looking perfectly living, sometimes for days. And then one night, they open a door from the inside. A pause that I felt all the way down in my chest. Esteban. If he's a slow one, and he turns inside that room, with all of you sealed in there with him, the room becomes the luggage bay all over again. Except there is no crossing left to make. You're at the end of the crossings. That garage is the last room. There's nowhere I can move you to from there. So here was my second impossible decision. And it was crueler by far than the first, because the first had been about the dead, and this one was about the living. Petar was a man, a frightened, exhausted, grieving man who was utterly alone in the world, who had done nothing wrong in his entire life but survive a scratch he never asked for. And every decent principle I had ever held told me plainly that you do not put a living man out into the dark to die for the crime of what he might one day become. But the boys, it always came back to the boys. 23 children asleep on a concrete floor, and a man among them now who might, at any moment, in any hour of any of the remaining days, become the exact thing that would end every single one of them in one sealed room, with no door left to run through. I did not decide it alone, and I will not pretend the deciding was clean, because nothing about it was. We talked it through most of one night, Costa and Mateo and Saul and Inez and I, in low voices in the far corner of the garage, while Peter sat against the opposite wall, holding his scratched arm, and watching us decide his fate, which is its own particular and terrible kind of horror. To sit and watch a circle of men in a corner weigh whether you live or die. And in the end, it was Peter himself who lifted the decision out of our hands, the way Dr. Pana had lifted his out of ours. Because there was something in that place, in those days, that kept handing the very hardest choices to the people who were brave enough to make them about themselves. "I can hear you," Peter said from across the garage, and his voice was steady, steadier than any of ours had been. "You don't have to whisper, and you don't have to do it. Whatever you've decided over there, in your corner, I know what I am. I've felt it since this morning, since before the light came up, something behind my eyes. A pressure, building, like a word I can't remember, and it keeps getting louder." He stood up slowly, one hand on the wall. "I locked myself in that office to live. I wanted to live more than anything. But I'm going to walk back out of it now, to keep the rest of you living, because that's the only thing left that I can still choose. And I'm not going out the roller door into the court. Don't even think it. If you lift that door even once, even for me, you risk the whole room. There's a service hatch in the ceiling of the mezzanine office, an access panel into the duct space above. I came down through the building that way before the seal, when it all started. I'll go back up the same way. I'll be gone, sealed off above you, and you'll lock the office door behind me, and the room stays the room." He looked directly at me across the dark garage. "Tell the operations man up in his control room that there was one more of us in here who held the line. He'll know what that's worth." I gave him the only thing I had left to give a man, which was the truth and a clean way out. We let him go up and through the ceiling hatch of the mezzanine office, and Saul followed him up the ladder and sealed the panel behind him with the last of the duct tape, and then dragged a heavy steel filing cabinet across it on the office floor, and we never heard him turn. I have chosen deliberately, with full knowledge of the alternative, to believe that he made it up into the duct space and went somewhere quiet and far from us, deep into the cold dark of the building before the word he could not remember finally got loud enough to answer itself. I have to believe that. The only other thing to believe puts him in the ducts directly above where the boys slept, and I cannot put him there. Dr. Pana had been right about the burning out. That was the mercy at the very bottom of all of it, the one promise that the long night kept. On the third day, the murmur outside changed. We had been able to hear the court the whole time through the roller door, that constant low working of the dead that had become our weather, our background, the thing the youngest boys had learned to sleep through. And on the third day, it began to thin, and to slow, and to fall, here and there, into long stretches of complete silence. Halloran watched it on his cameras and narrated it to us on the last 4% of the phone's life, his voice cracking with exhaustion and something that was almost joy. The first ones going down and not getting up. The stiffening that Pana had predicted spreading through the standing crowd in the south concourse like frost spreading across a window. The fresh ones outside our doors slowing to the swaying stillness of the old ones. The tides growing weak and weaker, and then simply ceasing altogether. The water no longer moving anywhere because the legs that moved it had stiffened past walking. By the evening of the third day, the court outside our door was, Halloran said, watching it on his screen, a field of standing and fallen shapes that no longer roamed, that swayed feebly toward a sound, but could no longer chase it, that were exactly what the old doctor had told us they would become. And the seal had held. The metro beneath the East Concourse had never been breached. And the city beyond the walls had slept 3 full nights without ever once knowing that 23 boys and an old man behind a steering wheel and a doctor and an electrician and a tired good man with his hand on a switch had stood between it and the end of everything. The containment team came on the morning of the 4th day. Real ones this time, in real suits, with real authority and real orders on paper. And they came precisely because the burning out had made it safe enough to come, which is to say they came after the dangerous work was finished, after the line had already been held by the people the world had quietly written off as the price of holding it. They found us in the maintenance bay, 29 living souls behind one locked door, gray and thin and silent. And they found Halloran in his control room 4 levels up where he had sat alone for 4 days and nights, with his hand near the master switch, refusing to leave it, refusing to lift a single barrier in the whole building until a team with more authority than him arrived to take the weight of it from his hands. I am told that when they finally reached his welded door and cut through to him, he would not release the controls until they showed him written orders, signed, because he had decided that he alone would carry the seal until someone with the authority to do so took it from him, and not one moment before and not one moment after. They let us out through the vehicle checkpoint where we had come in 4 nights before. The wedge barrier dropped back down into the road, smooth and silent and quick, the way it should have the night we arrived 4 minutes too late to be on the right side of it. I walked out of that stadium into a flat gray morning, the city's ordinary traffic already moving on the ring road beyond the wall, people driving to work with no idea. And I turned around once to look back at the place, the great ribbed shell of concrete and steel that had closed with all of us inside it. And I understood, standing there in the cold, that I would spend the entire rest of my life being asked whether we had done the right thing, and that I would never once have a clean answer to give. Because here is what the night taught me, and it is not the lesson I would have chosen. We survived because we became a wall. We survived because an old doctor turned himself into bait and walked into the dead with his arms raised, and because a frightened electrician climbed up into a ceiling rather than risk a room full of sleeping boys, and because a tired, decent man sat alone with his hand on a switch and chose a city over a bus, and then refused to let that choice quietly become a murder. We survived because the seal held. And the very same seal that saved the city was the seal that trapped us. The one decision pointed 2 opposite ways at once, exactly like the guard at the fence on the first night, who begged me with the same breath to open the gate and to keep it shut. I have come to think, in the long years since, that the guard understood in that one instant everything that took me 4 days and 3 lives to learn. That sometimes the thing that saves you and the thing that traps you are not 2 things at all. They are the same thing, the same choice, and you do not get to keep only the half of it that saves you. You take the whole of it, both halves at once, and you carry the half that traps you for the rest of your life. 23 boys went home to their families. I drove a different bus to the airport, a clean one the Federation arranged, because ours was still inside the seal with a severed hand flexing in its luggage bay. And as far as I have ever been able to learn, it is there still, parked in a vehicle court of a stadium that no team has played in since, behind barriers I am told were never fully dismantled. The official account of those 4 days does not mention a visiting team bus at all. It does not mention Dr. Pana or Petar in the ducts, or the guard at the fence who ran the wrong way to warn a stranger. It mentions a successful containment operation and a great city saved from disaster. And it allows people to believe that the saving was clean. And it was not clean. It was paid for, in full, in names. And I am one of the very few people left alive who knows what those names were. I have told you those names tonight, the ones I'm permitted to tell, because somebody should, and because the families are still waiting, and because Dr. Pana walked into a tide of the dead with his arms raised like a man conducting an orchestra, and made no sound at all, and a man who can do that with the last minute of his life should not be allowed to become a blank space in a report that pretends he never breathed. If this story has stayed with you the way it has stayed with me, sit with one question before you go, and tell me honestly down in the comments what you would have done in my seat. When Halloran told me, down that crackling line, that the seal was the only thing standing between that building and the metro and the sleeping city, and that no real help was ever truly coming, and that we were the containment and not the rescued, should I have done it? Should I have started the engine and driven that 18 tons of steel straight into the barrier and torn it open and taken our chances out in the night with 23 boys at my back and a whole sleeping city in front of me? Or was the old doctor right? That the only honorable path left to any of us was to survive inside the seal and never once break it, whatever it cost, however many it cost. I have had a very long time to turn it over now, more years than I like to count, and I still do not know. Some nights I am the guard at the fence, throwing my whole body against the wire, begging the gate to open. Some nights I am the same guard, in the same breath, begging it to stay shut forever. And most nights, the hard ones, I am both of them at once, both halves of that one impossible choice. And that is the only entirely true thing I have left to tell you about the night the stadium closed, with all of us still inside it, 4 minutes too late to ever stand on the other side of the seal.